You're watching the Flourishing Introvert Show. If you're an introvert with more to offer and are looking for ways to play to your strengths authentically, you're in the right place. With up to 50% of any population identifying as an introvert, if you're not one, you'll know one, but you may not understand what makes them tick. Watching this show will help you to build that understanding and consequently build better business and personal relationships. Many people don't find out until their mid-years that what makes them different is their introversion. So this show is also for you if you're curious about becoming the best version of yourself. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's show. Come on in, make yourself comfortable and join me as I explore something that actually as an introvert you might not be too comfortable with. So don't say I didn't warn you. And this week what we're exploring is, are introverts reluctant heroes of their own stories? Interesting, huh? So what we're looking at here is really starting to think about the stories we tell. And for those of you who've not joined me before, I'm Joanna Rawbone, the founder of Flourishing Introverts, and I've got a big mission. And the mission I'm on is to shift the extroversion bias so that people can own their introversion with confidence, pride, and a lived experience of equity. I've been in London today at an all-day workshop on the receiving end rather than delivering it for a change. And even through that workshop, I can tell you that we're a long way from that right now. So I work with introverts who want to reach more of their potential, and I rattle the cages of organisations and educational establishments to highlight and shake out the extroversion bias that frankly is usually hiding in plain sight. I've shared on a few occasions about the roles we play in our lives, and therefore the stories we tell and often hang on to for far too long and sometimes catastrophize. And if you talk to many people, they'll tell you that introverts hate being in the limelight. But that's not necessarily true, and in some cases is actually just another example of unhelpful generalisations. So how would it be if I were to suggest that we can all be the hero of our own journeys, of our own stories? And for some of you, you will take that easier. It will land easier with some of you than it will with others. Here's why I think it's an important concept, though, because as far as I'm concerned, it has nothing to do with ego. And because we know that often introversion is conflated with shyness, it has nothing to do with shyness either. Being a hero of your own story is not about whether you're shy or not. And I think this is where many online marketers miss the mark when creating their supposed own hero's journey, their rags to riches stories that we so often see on social media. You know how it goes. This time last year, I was living in a skip and now I'm a multi-millionaire. Just follow my steps and this could be you too. Not only can I not relate to journeys like that, to stories like that, but I know that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And I know that often those stories are over-dramatized for effect, which means that there are many of us who actually don't relate to that. But here's something else. Following exact steps, and many of these gurus insist that you trust the process, do exactly what they say. And often that's not the answer. After all, how does that allow for individuality, diversity, and inclusion? Many, and I know as I've been on the receiving end, many of these gurus will then try to shame anybody who questions the process by saying something like, clearly you don't want success enough then, or so you're not committed, or something similar. I've had gurus try to handle my objections rather than exploring my questions with me, and that's a very different process. I mentioned that many typical heroes' journeys don't resonate with me, and here's why. You know how important authenticity is to me, and because I've never been homeless, I've never actually been really down on my luck. Even when I've had to count the pennies to make it through to the end of the month, I always still recognized that I was more fortunate than many. I've resisted taking the victim role, and I've mentioned that in other shows. After all, there is always someone worse off than me. And actually, quite a lot of the population, frankly, are in a less fortunate position, partly by attitude, partly by circumstance. And certainly I'm not choosing to put myself in that victim role when I feel a bit hard done by, as I sometimes do. More often than not, I'd choose to be the hero or heroine, if that matters to you, in my life because why wouldn't I? So my question then, do we as introverts really make reluctant heroes? Actually, I think we make more understated or quiet heroes than reluctant heroes. The hero's journey is one that we're very familiar with, as most movies and books are based around that structure, around that format. And the reason they resonate with people is because, to some extent, we recognize ourselves in their plots, in their stories. We recognize a little sliver of us in their stories that they create. The expert that I'm turning to here is Joseph Campbell, Professor of Literature and researcher in comparative mythology. Through his research, Campbell discovered that all myths are cyclical. They follow a pattern. Whilst all of the characters in a myth have a role, the main hero of the story is undertaking a significant journey. Although interestingly, the significance of that journey is not always apparent until near the end. And so that we're all on the same page, Campbell defines a hero as someone who has tamed his own demons. So there's some work for us to do. Campbell's journey has several steps through which our potential hero will suffer some setbacks and yet ultimately emerge triumphant. Skip to millionaire that we recognize in those social media stories. And the reason that we resonate in some cases is because all of us have suffered some setbacks. And whilst they have been important for our development, those of us that choose to recognize the hero or heroine that we can be in that story, choose not to let those setbacks define us. We learn from them. We recognize the lessons in those stories. We don't wallow in them and get caught in a vicious spiral. Working with introverted clients as I do, though, here are some of the problems that they've brought when I've been working with them. If they see introversion as a setback from which there is no place to emerge, how can they become triumphant? And I understand this because with society and business, education even favouring the extrovert ideal, it's easy for them to think that introversion is a setback, and yet it is a gift, not a setback. But we need to change our mindset sometimes to see that. Secondly, the constant conflation that happens with conflating introversion with depression, with shyness, with misanthropy even, and sometimes by the introverts themselves, my clients included, creates a narrative of contraction and stuckness. Remember the Marianne Williamson quote again? It's, it creates that narrative and the conditions to play small, which then leads on to the third thing I often see, which is comparisonitis, which often has us looking around and yet failing to see our fellow quieter ones who are making a real mark on the world. And my message is, look closer, because they are there. So I thought I'd see if I can use Joseph Campbell's structure of the hero's journey to accurately depict my journey through life, not to over-exaggerate it, not to think about it in terms of skip to millionaire, but to see if I can unearth how I am indeed a hero, or if you like, heroine in my own journey. I happen to be okay with the phrase hero, actually. So Campbell has a number of steps, and I'll take you through them one by one and where I think I am on this journey this time around, because we have multiple trips through our hero's journey if we choose to see that. So step one in his process is called Ordinary World. And we all start off living ordinary lives in an ordinary world with ordinary problems. I happen to be the second child of parents who were teachers, and everything seemed very ordinary to me in my childhood. It seemed ordinary, normal, commonplace to go to school. And because both of my parents were teachers, I couldn't wait to go to school. There was nothing scary about it. It was where both my parents and my sister already were. So I couldn't wait to go and join them in some ways, even though we were in different places. And of course, it's not until we start to mature that we notice the differences between ourselves and others. My ordinary problems were testing my boundaries, same as many teenagers, finding my rebellious streak, which led to me marrying too young because I thought I knew better. I'm sure we've all made mistakes, maybe not as big as that, but teenage mistakes for sure. And if I'm honest, one of the reasons I did that was to prove something to my family. Yeah, well, that didn't work. But that at the time was my ordinary life. And my ordinary life, in some ways, continued through into my 30s and 40s, even though I did some less ordinary things, which I might talk about on another show. Step two in Campbell's journey, hero's journey, is a call to adventure. And Campbell says that future heroes hear a call to adventure, something that shakes them from their ordinary life. And as I've just mentioned, as I look back over my life, I now recognize that there were many such calls. So I was called to become a telecoms engineer in the late 70s, early 80s, when women didn't do that kind of thing. I was, you know, something of a maverick, something of a kind of pioneer in that sense. I then went on to do other things that were definitely a call to adventure. But that's not the one I'm talking about here. But interestingly, step three in his hero's journey is a refusal of the call. So quite often, we might notice the call, we might hear the call, but be reluctant, even procrastinate, refusing to heed the call. And I think we have to be present and open to opportunities, sometimes to even recognize the call to adventure. So the call I'm referring to here in this particular version of my hero's journey is a call that came when my mother died, as I recognized that I was at something of a crossroads, although there were more than 4 routes or 4 options at that point. And because there were so many different directions I could take, I honestly didn't know what to do. At that point, I joined a women's mastermind group in an attempt to discover what might be the right way to proceed for me. And whilst the germ of the idea for flourishing introverts was planted during that mastermind, I procrastinated, prevaricated, protested for my own incapabilities. I did not nurture the germ of that seed. And during the time of that mastermind, it wasn't the mastermind leaders who inspired me, but I did connect with one of the group in particular. And she challenged me, she supported me, she helped me to see the potential of my mission. And what I now recognize is that I had entered step 4, meeting with the mentor. And I might have expected that it was one of those mastermind leaders, but no, it was one of my fellow mastermind members who happened to be my mentor. So this step is typically when our potential hero, me in this case, meets someone who convinces them to embark on a journey in spite of any initial reluctance. So even though I'd argued for my own incapabilities, this mentor really inspired me to take action. And I can resonate with this. And also looking back, I recognize that there have been many mentors for me, and the right one always seemed to appear at the right time. And there's an old aphorism around that, isn't there? When the student is ready, the master will appear. Gosh, and my gratitude for those mentors, those masters, has inspired me to make myself available as a mentor for others if they think I'm a right person. Because, of course, in a mentoring relationship, you should never be paired with a mentor. As a mentee, it's down to you to look for the mentor, the person who inspires you. But I need to make myself available should I be the right person. That enables me, having met my mentor, having been inspired into action, to take step 5, which Campbell calls crossing the threshold. And it's during this step that the future hero takes the first step of their adventure. During that mastermind, I said I'd planted the seeds, and eventually through working with my mentor, I'd established Flourishing Introverts under the umbrella of my own limited company. But the steps ahead of me were somewhat hazy. I knew what I was starting, but I wasn't starting with a clear plan or a strategy. I then received a nudge from a longtime buddy who told me that the closing date for applications for TEDx Folkestone was coming up in just 2 days' time. Now, Folkestone is a beautiful seaside town, just 25 minutes drive away from me. And it was ideal because a TEDx had always been on my bucket list, because I knew I wanted to leave a legacy, but didn't know what my TEDx would be about or how I'd even go about it. Now I knew my starting point, so I crossed that threshold. So I rushed my application, which included a written piece, a short video of me talking about what I wanted to talk about in the TEDx, and a little about my favorite TEDx. That's a tough one for me because I'm a big TEDx fan, but my favorite is always, and probably will always be, Caroline McHugh's TEDx, which is The Art of Being Yourself. It's beautiful, and if you haven't seen it, do check it out. Because the deadline was so close, it was probably a good thing, because if I'd been given too long, if I knew about it too far in advance, I would probably just have prevaricated for longer. And I look back at that short video that I shot and I squirm. But you know what? Done is better than perfect, and it did the job. I got accepted. So we moved into step 6, what Campbell calls the challenges. And Campbell says that on our journey, heroes encounter many problems, setbacks, and failures. And if the TEDx was me crossing this threshold, that in itself was a huge challenge, because, you know, I've spent years actually being on stage in front of people. You know, I've emceed events of over 1,000 people. I've delivered conferences of over 500 people. But this was me on stage talking about something that really mattered to me, that was really personal to me. And of course, there were other problems, setbacks and failures as well. And the years since have provided false starts, deviations down rabbit holes, massive self-doubt, and at times a desire to throw in the towel. But in the hero's journey, these challenges have to be overcome in order to continue. And because I was clear on my mission, continue I did, right into Campbell's step 7, approach to the innermost cave. Perfect description, because this occurs when the hero has overcome most of the initial challenges, and what's left is the biggest challenge of all, themselves. I'd already encountered self-doubt, as you've heard, and now it was time to strike a deal with my inner critic, who, by the way, is called Gladys. And I have a process that helps people get to meet their inner critic, because we can't silence, we can't manage, we can't kind of, get rid of our inner critic. The best thing to do is to understand what the fear of the inner critic is. And I also needed to get my inner advocate to play gatekeeper with that critic. And I also chose and have processes for all of these to awaken my inner rebel, so that I felt more supported internally, so that I could be more playful, so that I could be quietly gutsy, because that's what my inner rebel helps me to do. Now, all of those, especially them working together, should enable me to get out of my own way. And of course, that's easier said than done. And what I now look at through Campbell's process is it moved me on to step 8, the ordeal. At this point in the journey, the heroine, me, usually realizes what their biggest weakness is and goes to confront it. My biggest weakness, my limiting beliefs. Those firmly entrenched, embedded beliefs developed and reinforced over decades that always presented a reason as to why I couldn't do something, or why I wouldn't be successful, or why I wouldn't leave the legacy I so desired. So the next step on the journey is step 9, the reward. And this is when the hero successfully confronts their biggest weaknesses. And in my case, as I've mentioned, my limiting beliefs, emerges triumphant, a better, stronger person. I actually have a course around flipping your limiting beliefs that I built based on my own process as to how I managed to confront that biggest weakness. And I am certainly better and stronger, but it is still work in progress, as pesky limiting beliefs have a habit of popping up in new places. Do you remember that child's game? I think it was called Whack-a-Mole, where it's kind of, you had to, a mole type thing would pop up through different holes and you had to hit it with a mallet. Well, I seem to find that dealing with limiting beliefs is a bit like playing that game over and over and over. But fortunately, over time, I noticed that there was a pattern, and I could almost predict when the next one would pop up and from where. However, limiting beliefs still have the potential to catch me out. So I need to remain alert. I can't get complacent about them. So I now think I am here at step 10, the road back. I'm at the starting point of sharing what I've learned with those who are ready to hear it, hence me creating that Flip Your Limiting Beliefs course. I have a new wisdom, deeper understanding, and a greater sense of empathy for my fellow introverts, because I've been prepared to be vulnerable. Remember last week's episode where we were talking about fulfillment, which is the unfolding self? Well, that's what happened when I was prepared to confront my own limiting beliefs. My podcasts, these TV shows, weekly reflections and occasional blogs are my way of sharing what I have learned, as well as through the courses. And this journey continues for me. I'm not at the end. Flourishing is a journey, not a destination. And that's okay with me, because I am not the finished article. I am still work in progress. So according to Campbell, I have 2 steps still to face. Step 11 is the resurrection, apparently the moment when the hero pulls out a last-second victory from the brink of defeat. I can't begin to think what that will be, and I can't say I'm really looking forward to it, but you know what? I'm ready. Bring it on. If it's part of the journey, I want to experience it. How can I share authentically otherwise? If I dip out now, if I turn tail and decide it's too difficult, the journey so far will have been in vain. And I need to continue, because the last step of the journey is the return with the elixir. This is when the newly enlightened hero gives back to the community. Now, I'm choosing not to wait until I've completed this step 12 to give back, as there is already so much value that I can add and help I can offer to introverts as they embark on their own flourishing journey. And I have a deep sense that there is no one elixir, and that the components that I've found probably need to be custom blended by those looking for their own way forward. A pinch of this, a drop of that, a whole bunch of the other. So are you a reluctant hero or a quiet, understated hero? I know what I go for. Campbell says, if you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. You see, that sounds a lot like flourishing to me, like living a fulfilled life. So my question is, are you ready? Are you ready to find the track that has been waiting for you? Are you ready to be the hero of your own journey? I wonder what challenges you'll encounter, both internal and external. Suffice to say that introversion is not one of them. I do hope that in some way I've whetted your appetite for the journey. And please let me know, or please know that I am here should you need anything. That's what mentors are for, after all, whether it's a guide, a helping hand, or a nudge. And here's how you can find out how to work more with me, or to find out more about what I do. If you go to the website flourishingintroverts.com, you'll notice that there's useful information there. The course, certainly the Flip Your Limiting Beliefs course that I've mentioned, and freebies. There's lots there for you to dig into. And of course, you can always email me with any questions, comments, thoughts about how you might have been nudged to recognize you as the hero in your own journey. Thank you for joining me today.